I'm Ilana Webster Kogen. I'm a lecturer in the music department. And the experience of music students here is unique because there's music all over SOAS, and our department is a big part of that. So our students are sort of at the center of a lot of the things that are happening around campus. But really, all of the students who come to SOAS should expect for music to be a big part of their experience, ideally at least, whether they take a music class or if they join a music society or if they just hear it playing out on the steps or if they stay around late in the library and hear our Cuban big band playing on Tuesday nights. One of the great things about the experience of coming to study at SOAS, especially in a department like music, is that students really get a lot of one-to-one contact with their lecturers. Both they have a lot of contact hours because of tutorial sessions, but also because they have oftentimes small classes where they really focus a lot on participation. So I think for our students, it's a really good experience of getting a combination of hands-on musical performance experience with excellent opportunities in class to really hone their critical thinking skills. We approach feedback in really a number of ways in the music department, and we've done a lot of it with the help of Mehmet and other people in the LTD. We have a really wide variety of ways of assessing students, both because we have practical exams where students give performances and because we really support alternative modes of assessment. So students often do submit essays for their classes and they'll have quizzes and written exams. But we also promote the idea of submitting radio broadcasts for their classes. And part of the mechanism we have in our department for supporting that is that we have an award-winning radio producer who teaches in our department, Lucy Duran. And she runs a class that won the teaching prize a couple of years ago, I think producing world music for radio. And students learn how to make really high-level podcasts. So we support the idea of using podcasts or radio as alternatives to essay writing, particularly because it is often a much better way of supporting our students who are dyslexic or have other kinds of organizational issues that might keep them from being able to organize their essay writing according to the very, very strict deadlines that we have in the UK. Another thing that we really like to do in our department is to have a lot of formative assessment. So for one of my master's classes this year, students submit their essay topic in week 3 of term, and then they submit a title and abstract in week 5, and then an annotated bibliography in week 7, and a detailed outline in week 10. So they have a lot of opportunities to work beyond the mechanism of Turnitin, which we really appreciate, but they have a lot of opportunities to work with us in a one-to-one capacity on their work so that they're really getting constant feedback on their progress all the way through term. So that by the time they have submitted something that then goes through 2 markers and an external assessment, they already have a pretty good idea of what's expected of them. And this is something that we find really important in assessment, not just that students know the deadlines, but also that they know what the expectation is. And we find that offering them as much support outside of lecture time is a really useful mechanism for them in making sure that they can do their best work. For students to do the best they can with assessment, to make sure that they improve from their first assignment to the second assignment and have a progression that they're happy with, I would actually say that the first responsibility lies with their lecturers and the conveners of their courses, because a huge number of our students, we find, actually aren't aware of the mechanisms on Turnitin to give them feedback. So I think it's important for there to be a workshop for them at the beginning of term, or for all the lecturers just to signal to them at the beginning of all of their classes that feedback is available on Turnitin. A lot of students see their mark and aren't aware that it's there. So I would say the first thing is just to make sure that the students know about it. And once they do, it's always helpful to invite students individually to come to office hours. A lot of students don't respond to the open invitation. My office hours are from X to Y hours and you can all feel free to come. Students don't really respond to that unless they're in a sort of crisis mode. Instead, what some of my colleagues in the music department do is they give the students their mark, and maybe there's some feedback on Turnitin as well, but they personally invite them to come for slots during their office hours so that they can talk about their essays. And it's important that students understand exactly what it is that they need to work on conceptually and in terms of the written language. So being able to speak to the students face-to-face about the written text they've submitted gives us a much better sense of where we might need to refer them beyond ourselves to give them extra support. So oftentimes we'll send them to the LTD to have one-on-one sessions, or to go to study skills sessions, or to just sign up for Skills for Success in general. But sometimes things will come up in office hours that don't come up necessarily in the essay. For example, if I think of a student who is dyspraxic, it might not necessarily be apparent from their writing that they're dyspraxic, but they might have trouble organizing themselves and getting their texts together, their written sources together ahead of time. And so the student might submit late, and being able to talk to the student face-to-face about the issues that they're dealing with is really a much more effective way than having turn it in be sort of just a one-way conversation, where the students get their feedback and then have to figure things out for themselves. I would say that we have a lot of wonderful mechanisms in place at SOAS to support students who have alternative learning needs. I think probably most of my colleagues are aware that students are entitled to extra time in an exam, or that they are allowed to have an extra 5 days on their essay submission deadline, but probably lecturers are in less of a position to diagnose students themselves. We have a lot of students coming to us who might need additional mechanisms for support, and they themselves aren't aware of it. And I would say that the first step is probably in giving academics a little bit more training so that they're able to identify student needs. And I would say that comes even before the idea of having an office that deals with those needs very well. It's really important that academics understand what the different kinds of students' needs are. So I know we have usually a single session, but I think probably a little bit more training about exactly what kinds of things do you see in a dyslexic student, or a dyspraxic student, or a student with attention deficit, or dyscalculia, which probably a lot of people don't even know about. So I think that's one important point of contact. I saw a student recently whom I referred to the LTD for training, for testing, and he discovered that he was dyslexic, and it was the end of year 3 of his degree. This was a very, very bright student who missed a lot of class and submitted all of his essays late, and was looking to graduate with maybe a 2.2. Such a bright student that if this had been caught earlier, he would have really come through with a sense of ownership of his degree. Not just that he would have gotten a higher class mark as he graduated, but he would have felt like he had really earned something. And I think that's the responsibility, that's part of the responsibility on lecturers and on the university infrastructure. That's part of our responsibility to students. So we should think of every student in terms of not just what kinds of problems they might be coming to us with, but also just how are the ways that we can maximize their achievement here. We like to think of ourselves, in the music department in particular, but really a lot of the departments across the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, as being at the forefront of several aspects of student support. We were a department that was very happy to spearhead voice assessment, vocal assessment on Turnitin. I think some of the students, especially the dyslexic students who we've spoken about, might have a better experience of getting their feedback if it's presented orally in addition to being written down. So I think that's a nice initiative. We have a really hands-on approach to personal tutors. I think the personal tutors are a pretty important line of support for the students, where we are really sure to meet with the students at least once per term, sometimes more in groups if we can, to make sure that the students are not only doing okay, you can't always tell that by talking to students, but just to make sure that every single one of them is aware of what we can do for them if they have any problems. Again, we have students who submit work late because a close member of their family died, and it never occurs to them that they can get those marks back. So knowing things about what the rules are, which they might not find out because most students aren't going to read the student handbook, we think the personal tutors are a good place to really make sure that the students know what their rights are, and how to make sure that they are focusing on their work and not on being nervous about not being penalized. I think in general, it's more important that the students get thorough feedback than whether it's written down or voice feedback. So we've set up in our department, and probably a lot of other departments have the same thing, we've set up a set of 5 guidelines. And so the students know when they're writing their essays that we're going to be assessing them based on these 5 basic criteria that have to do with their writing, their coverage of the topic, their how appropriate their survey of literature is, their bibliography. In the music department, if they've used special techniques such as musical transcription, if they have a podcast included, how polished the podcast is. The students know what's expected of them. And I find with feedback that it's much more useful for the students to get thorough enough feedback that they know exactly what to work for the next time than the medium through which it's delivered. For a first-year student or a student who's returning to education after a period away, I would say that probably the very best thing they can do is to make sure that they familiarize themselves immediately with what's available to them. So in the case of dealing with individual classes, we assign a lot of readings on JSTOR, and it's important that they learn immediately what JSTOR is and how to use it so that they don't get stressed the night before when they have 4 articles to read. So they should familiarize themselves with the electronic databases and how Turnitin works so that they don't have problems when they're submitting, and how they can access all of the course outlines, and that they know exactly where they can go to ask these questions. They know who their personal tutors are. So I think we probably take for granted now as lecturers that all of the students know what Moodle is, because now, students know what Moodle is, but some students have been out of education since before people were widely using the internet for a lot of things. So it's really important to make sure that all of the students understand what it is that they need to be using. But also, it's important that the students think of their degree as something that they're here to do their best in. And so they should think of it as something that where they're going to take pride in their work, and should look for all the resources they can that will help them maximize that. So if it has to do with writing help or library tours, we tend to send the students, we tend to refer all of our first year students and all of our master's students to the LTD, because there's an amazing number of resources there for them to use, whether they just want to get a first or whether they think that they might be having problems with specific classes. I think that making sure that we are referring them on instead of just making sure that they turn up for class, which is of course important. I have only been teaching in the years since Turnitin has been brought into use widely, but I think it's generally a good mechanism. It has some limitations in terms of lecturers' ability to give students a little bit of leeway in one direction or another. But I think one really potentially dangerous thing about Turnitin is that since it produces an originality report, I think we probably become a little bit too lax about even thinking about plagiarism. I think most of us trust technology, especially those who didn't grow up using technology all the time. We probably trust a little too much that the technology knows what it's doing, the software knows what it's doing, and so we don't really think about plagiarism so much. And so we really need to think about other ways that students might not be working within their own best interests, such as repeating material from other essays. They might not be doing things word for word, but we have to take extra special care to make sure that they're not duplicating material that they've covered in other classes before. Also, things like bibliographies, the students really need. I think they really need a lot of help in, and Turnitin could possibly have some kind of formatting mechanism that could make things much easier for them. One of the first things I do in any of my classes is direct all of my students to the set of little pages outside of RGO 1, one of which is a how to cite page, and I tell them it's probably the most comprehensive document that they'll need for all of their essays, and they should go and read it and take it and put it on their wall at home. I think most students don't actually learn how to do a bibliography that they can do the same way for every class, and one way is for us to teach them how to do it and to show them how to do it, but that means that in every class we wind up spending time telling them things that they could learn equally easily if there were some sort of formatting within the software for them.